He's the one to see, I guess. All right. So on page 17, you survived your math test. Okay. On page 17, you have this sheet. I was going to make you some photocopies of it, and I can probably still get some for like later on in the week if need be, but copies of course are down at the time. So page 17, it's the one right before all the dead word list. This is basically a rundown of your final exam. I don't know if there's any more back there, Kelly, but I'll make some more copies when I'm able to. All I want to kind of do today is give you a rundown of what's going on for final exam for the essay, so that, you know, starting tomorrow, and this is when people kind of will be in and out with AP exams and all that kind of stuff, we have at least a good idea of how you're going to kind of set it up. But first, we'll have our little phone call. Mr. Kane? Yes. Right? Right. I sent her over. So, yeah, Ashley sent me an email for it. So, okay? Yep, no problem. Bye. So the hope would be that at least after today, you might not know exactly which books you're going to do, and you might not even be entirely sure how the argument's going to be set up, but you at least know the overall structure of what it's going to be. Ultimately, what you want to decide is that you're going to pick two books that you're going to do a comparison contrast for. On here, where it says possible text, those should be all the books that we've read throughout the course of the year. I don't think I skipped any, but it was purely accidental. Down below, you see like possible themes and all that kind of stuff. Those are not ones that you have to choose from. They're just kind of giving you ideas of concepts that you would be able to look at. Remember, and the date that I have on here is different because this is the one from last year. Remember the due dates that we're looking at, ignore this, your rough draft, and that's just going to be, like, you could have something on Google Docs. You don't have to have it printed out. Your rough draft is going to be for Monday the 21st. The final copy is the one that you're going to have for May the 24th. That's going to be a Thursday when you would submit it. So 2 weeks from tomorrow, you would submit your final copy. You would be completely done. All things done. Fist pump. Yay. What you're ultimately going to be doing is having an essay that is going to be, and you see here where it says estimated length, you're looking at 8 paragraphs. That one's pretty much non-negotiable. You're going to have 8 paragraphs. Not everyone would necessarily be in that 5 to 7 page range, although I don't think you're going to be having anything that's going to be like 3 pages long with having 8 paragraphs, because there would have to be, you know, enough depth and all that kind of stuff too. So essentially, you're looking for 2 books where they're trying to get some kind of similar argument across, and you're going to explain how they use similar, could be rhetorical devices, could be some things where, like, setting is equally important in both books, some type of character, but how they use those things to get the same kind of argument across. To try to make sense of it, we had a phone call for you, too, to go over, Marina. This is big business. To try to make sense of it, I need you to take out a blank sheet of paper. It can be line paper, it can be back of a weekly syllabus. You need a blank sheet of paper. Weekly syllabus. On your full sheet of paper, like the middle third, I need you to put 2 vertical parallel lines. It's a lot of math terms. Third, parallel lines, vertical. We are drawing a tree. All right, now, connect your lines. Give yourself some roots at the bottom for your tree. No pine trees. Your tree trunk? Make sure before you do your branches, give the squirrel a nice little home. Give yourself some bark lines.
Can I have a squirrel popping out of mine? You're such an artist.
That might be a little too
My roots look like
extravagant. And then for the tricky part, give yourself some branches.
Yeah, look at this tree.
If you need any help, Sydney is offering her artistic skills, so she'll help you out.
Sydney is very artistic.
She's not. What the heck is that? What happened there? I don't think this is really real.
Then take your green pen, give yourself a little group of leaves.
This is not a video. This is such a good frame.
And then on your smartboard, highlight your leaves. And then if you just hit Control D, it gives you a whole bunch of them. And then this is the best part. You can throw them, and they like bounce.
Wait, we don't have that feature.
On your 38th birthday, you can have a smartboard.
This is mine.
Beautiful.
What are everybody's thoughts? I wrote them where it's not in real life.
Which one? Yours? It goes in that
My
realm
brain's
a little
like
bit.
pointy.
Anyone have any ideas as to which two books you might use?
Do you like
I
and then
I
thought I
did
did illustrate. I love the illustrating. It's my favorite.
So you don't have to go to those novels.
The other day,
Sorry, you.
I was gonna say The Great Gatsby and it was really
Okay. That one was also mentioned in the first period. If you read The Jungle, I think that you get a lot of political stuff that would work well with those two. You don't have to know yet which books you're going to do. The ones that you might want to consider, and it's not me certainly trying to force it upon you, but Grapes of Wrath that Rebecca mentioned, Darby, you said Invisible Man. The nice thing about both of those books is they're lengthy, and so there's a lot of stuff that you can kind of pull from them. But you certainly want to go, I would say, with the two books that you like the most or dislike the least, and so then you'll be kind of more willing to work with them. I'm going to put up on here just because two books that we would be pretty familiar with. On one side of my tree, I'm going to go with Slaughterhouse 5, just because most recent one. And then I'm going to go with Cuckoo's Nest. So on my tree, on each side of the trunk, I have one of the two books that I would be using. If you want to write down Slaughterhouse 5 and Cuckoo's Nest just to be consistent with me, you can. If you want to put down your own books, that would be perfectly fine as well. Makes no difference. At the bottom, underneath my tree, I would be putting what my overall main argument would be. Now, I picked the book, so it's maybe not fair to ask you, but any arguments that you could see that would kind of link together Slaughterhouse 5 and Cuckoo's Nest, whether it be something listed on the page or anything else? Did a hamster arm?
Well, I was something about like, I guess Slaughterhouse 5 doesn't really have like mental illnesses, but they both.
Slaughterhouse 5?
Yeah, does it? They're both
Depending
in the
on
realm
your
of,
viewability.
like crazy people.
Yeah.
Who's a touch of reality.
Annie, what'd you say? Losing touch with reality? Like that one. Why did I put it below my tree? This is the base. It's the root of my argument, and it's going to grow into something nice and better.
Wait, but my tree's like really,
Well, your trees will get better. So the idea then would be that down here, I would be focusing on this argument where I'm saying both authors are trying to get this point across. And so you could have something where you could argue that if I could kind of tweak the argument and go that society alienates people who are different, pushes folks away, that you have an antagonistic society where it feels like you're always against somebody or against something. So there's a variety of arguments that you could go. But I would want to pick an argument where I feel like I could support it in both books. That doesn't mean that the viewpoint of that argument is going to be exactly the same. By no means does it mean the circumstances are going to be exactly the same, because you have two very completely different books, works, authors, possibly time periods that you're looking at. But from a thematic standpoint, I have at least one common base, one root of my argument that both books would look at. What I'm then going to start to think about are whether it be rhetorical devices or like significant types of characterization, what are ideas that show up in both books? For example, simple one to start off with, both books use some type of motif. What's a pretty predominant motif that you have in Cuckoo's Nest? Fog. Chief can't always see, feels kind of swarmed, consumed by it. It's not so much an object that is showing up in Slaughterhouse 5, but we have the motif of so it goes. So going along those lines, what would be other similarities that both books have?
wait, does that involve motifs?
No.
Oh, they both have a lot of
So I could, and depending upon what you go with, you might say violent diction, violent imagery, but some kind of aspect of violence within them.
unreliable narrators.
Are you thinking of Billy as like narrator or Vonnegut for Slaughterhouse? Okay, so if I go with unreliable narrator, certainly we're going with Chief with Cuckoo's Nest. Billy doesn't narrate Slaughterhouse 5, but I still could go with something like an unreliable protagonist, and the same idea would be able to come across. So, there's nothing wrong with it. Billy, I think there would be a literary term, thinking an A term that you could use for Billy and for, not Chief, but for McMurphy. I'm not thinking antagonist, but anti-hero. Anything else? So, violence, motif, unreliable protagonist, anti-hero. Don't have aliens in both. This might go a little bit too much with unreliable protagonist, but you could put the idea about at least mental illness. We hit the brick wall before we even began. So you're thinking like Nurse Ratched over here. What are you thinking for? Okay, so as like the bad guy? As like the bad guy for authority? Okay, so authoritative, like antagonist might be a person to put, or an authoritative villain. Most books say at some point you're going to be able to find, some kind of example of symbolism So, some kind of those generic terms would be able to come up with. I would say you want to probably try to come up with like 6 or 7 ideas. And again, you're just kind of brainstorming at this point. Once you come up with those, 6 or 7 ideas, then it would be a good idea to pick 3 of them that you think you would be able to develop pretty well, significantly, for both books. So I would say certainly motif would be something I could look at. Unreliable protagonist or the idea of mental illness, probably one of those 2 would go. I'll go unreliable protagonist. I'll take a look at anti-hero. So what this would be saying is in each book, in Cuckoo's Nest, I would be able to write about how the use of an anti-hero, motif, and an unreliable protagonist helps develop the argument or the idea about losing touch with reality, and then I would be able to do the same thing with Slaughterhouse-5. My introduction, therefore, for like that overall essay would go both Kurt Vonnegut and Ken Kesey in their novel Slaughterhouse-5 and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest explores the idea or the dilemma about people losing touch with reality. Both writers investigate this idea through the use of unreliable protagonists, an anti-hero, and a motif. What have I basically done so far as a compare-contrast at this point? I have compared, I pretty much put it with my 2 books at this point, what the similarities would be. So I'm doing a little dotted line here. Everything below this dotted line is letting me know how the books are going to be similar. What's going to happen once I get into my body paragraphs? Well, now I'm going to, tree pun number 2, branch out with my body paragraphs. So I'll have a body paragraph about motif in Slaughterhouse-5. I'll have a body paragraph about motif in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. We already said the motif in Cuckoo's Nest is the fog. The motif in Slaughterhouse-5 is So It Goes. Those are different. Therefore, we will be contrasting. And the same thing's going to be happening with the use of anti-hero. The same thing's going to be happening with my unreliable narrator. I'm going to go into the details for both books, but I'm going to go in different directions. So the first part of my essay, like the introduction, I'm establishing what my similarities are going to be, how they are the same. As I get into the body paragraphs, then it'll become very clear how those 2 books end up being very different.
So essentially, you're like making general statements about why they're the same, and then maybe specific reasons, like, of why they're different, using the similarities.
It's not even so much that you're going to be making statements about how they're different, but you're going to go into, here, let me show you the overall structure, and then I think it'll kind of help a little bit. Overall, how many paragraphs? You said you're going to have 8. So your first one's going to be an intro. You know that your last one down here is going to be conclusion. Say I do Slaughterhouse-5 first. So I write about motif. I do Slaughterhouse-5, anti-hero. I do Slaughterhouse-5, unreliable. Protagonist. The easiest way, and this would kind of go back to your question, the easiest way to complicate this essay is to try to do too much at once. In this body paragraph, my first body paragraph, I am only writing about the use of motif in Slaughterhouse-5. I'm not even mentioning One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. When I get to my next body paragraph, then in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, I'm going to write about the motif. Then in body paragraph number, well, 5th paragraph, body paragraph number 5, I'm only going to write about the use of the anti-hero in Cuckoo's Nest. And when I get down here into this last body paragraph, I'm only going to write about the whole unreliable protagonist idea again. So you are going to get into the specifics, Darby, of your original question. You're going to get into the specifics of what the motif is in Slaughterhouse-5. You're going to talk about So It Goes, Billy's using touch with reality, the impact of death, and all that kind of stuff. Your next paragraph, you might have a sentence kind of beginning, a transitional sentence, whereas Kurt Vonnegut focuses on a concept of So It Goes. Ken Kesey looks at an actual image or symbolic image of the fog in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. then you're only writing about that motif of fog or combine, mechanical imagery, whatever kind of motif you want to go with, within One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. The reader, me, hopefully is intelligent enough to figure out, while they both are using a similar strategy for a similar purpose with that overall argument, the details of how they use that strategy, that technique, become very different. You don't have to go, this is what Kesey does, but this is what Vonnegut does. This is what Vonnegut does, but that's different from Kesey, because the explanation in those body paragraphs will already kind of take care of it. You can write it however you want, but I would probably write all my Slaughterhouse-5 paragraphs first, like focus on that one novel, and then go back and then do the same thing for what my second one would be, so that I'm still in like the same frame of mind as I'm working through that one novel, and there's going to be a little bit more cohesiveness. But when people get themselves confused, I think, is when they try to do both of these in like 3 really large paragraphs, then it gets kind of hard to keep some kind of semblance, order, structure to the overall essay. What kind of questions are we coming up with, or concerns, worries? Taylor?
So you want your cuckoo's nest, like for example, how you use motif to be different, how you use anti-hero is different.
Well, it's like, so the body paragraphs is going to kind of illustrate or emphasize how it's different from the way that Vonnegut does it. But honestly, it's automatically going to be different because, like, we're going to be talking about Billy Pilgrim in Slaughterhouse-5. You talk about McMurphy in Cuckoo's Nest. The characters themselves are going to be different. That the structure of the essay naturally kind of takes care of the comparison, the contrast. So the intro is going to introduce, this is the similarities that are taking place with the overall argument and the techniques or literary elements that are being used. But kind of as Darby was saying, then the details that you're going to be doing in these body paragraphs, that's going to emphasize where you end up having the differences if it shows up on the board. The fact that McMurphy is a different type of character than what Billy Pilgrim would be, that's going to be different in itself, and it'll naturally kind of come off that way. But you don't have to go, Billy is, you know, is a surviving POW from World War II, whereas McMurphy is coming out of a work release program from prison. You don't have to go into all those details within the same paragraph. The details that you give in this paragraph will be different from the details in that paragraph, and therefore we'll be able to tell how each book does differ from one another. If you, like Rebecca, you said about doing Jungle and Grapes of Wrath, someone earlier brought up those two and was worried, are they going to be too similar? Because you're dealing with like capitalism versus socialism. You have a Lithuanian immigrant family. You have the Jodes who, you know, are in Oklahoma moving off to California. The circumstances are going to be different. The years are going to be different. You don't have to use traditional rhetorical devices like we, you know, have here with motif, anti-hero. Even unreliable protagonist is a little bit different. One of your points could be setting. You know, the setting is equally important in both books, whether it be the time period or the physical location. One of the possible themes, and probably really might not work as a theme, but if you were looking at physical journeys, that could be a component that you think is important in both books. Maybe you're doing Huck Finn in the Grapes of Wrath. In both books, you have a significant physical journey that takes place that allows for the argument to kind of unfold. So there could be some aspects of these things that you want to include as kind of like the elements that you want to investigate a little bit. So you have a little bit more freedom than you do when we just do a standard rhetorical analysis talking about diction and syntax and juxtaposition and all that kind of stuff.
You have the same motif, but just like he uses it this way while he uses it a different way.
And the motif doesn't even have to be the same thing. Like the similarity is the fact that they just both use motif, or they both use symbolism, they both use anti-heroes. You don't have to worry about, well, Kesey uses fog, so I need another example of fog. If you wanted to do something of like weather imagery, you know, as a common device, that would be one that's a little bit more similar. But even then, because the circumstances, the details are going to be different, it's still going to be a viable option. I think when people hear compare and contrast, they get a little bit worried that all I'm going to be doing is going back and forth about how this book is similar and how this book is different. the structure of the essay in itself will take care of most of those issues or questions that people have.
Can I go to the bathroom?
That's not a question.
I'm sorry.
Well, actually, it is a question.
I have to go to the bathroom. Can I?
You already went.
Not for actually going to the bathroom.
You should have done both at once.
I'm sorry.
Go to the bathroom, take the gum off.
Can I go?
You need Aiden to like hold your hand this time.
Maybe. Can I go though, actually?
Please wash your hands
I will.
when you come back.
You might have already answered this, but you have to use quotes.
I did not answer that. And you do have to use quotes. It's a good question. What seems like a fair number?
Like for two per two.
Yeah, let's go per paragraph.
I think like
Two? Two?
what?
I'm not gonna go that long. I'll go two. You go two. Can I use two quotes but only cite one of them? So two quotes, yeah, throughout. So normally we've been doing like two quotes plus a. You can pass it back. Good. And like a third cited reference or example. Two quotes would be fine. I'd be okay with that. And we would do the normal to be verb stuff. You know, intro, conclusion, first, last sentence, and body paragraph. Okay.
Do the two quotes just so that that includes interacting with the quotes? Yeah, like two examples.
I would want both examples to be quotes. So not doing one quote and then like a second like cited indirect reference, but you would go with two quotes. Now if you want to go to, when we did the Flannery O'Connor essay, like it was like a 6-word limit. I'm not putting a limit on it, but if you wanted to have like a short quote, you know, that's perfectly fine. The big lengthy block quotes I think cause more problems than honestly that they're worth. So your body paragraphs might be a little bit shorter than some other stuff that we've done, but you're writing 6 body paragraphs, there's still going to be a fair amount of substance to the essay. And you would want to try to spread around your evidence as best you can. That doesn't mean that if you're going with 6 quotes, you have to have like a 30-page gap between every single one. If, and then we'll get to your 2 questions, keep in mind on Turnitin, you have a repository in your Google Docs of a whole bunch of essays. I don't want you to copy and paste essays in, but if you're taking a look at independent reading journals, you know, your first independent reading book, you already did a rhetorical analysis for. Both independent reading books, you did formal essays, you know, that would be analyzing some kind of issue. So that could certainly kind of give you a starting point. Tomorrow, what's going to happen, unless you're taking an environmental science exam tomorrow afternoon, you sign your books back out that you want to use, or see Rebecca, and she can like let you borrow some of hers. But you'll get the books back that you can, you know, certainly find the quotes from. It's not that you're going to do this all off the top of your head.
In the conclusion, would we like analyze which one we feel like is a more effective way to approach the argument, like tie it all together, or do you think that's expanding it too much and we should just have it?
I'm not opposed to that in theory. It wouldn't be like a requirement for it, and that's something that we would be able to take a look at. The nice thing is, it's May 9th. Your rough draft is due on the 21st. Now, you don't have school next Tuesday because of Election Day. And next Wednesday, a week from today, who knows where you are mentally after doing all of your essays and multiple choice. But every other period between now and then, laptops are in here where we can take a look at, okay, what is your paragraph, how would we want to tweak this? So the hope would be, I don't want to say 100%, but the vast majority of it would be able to kind of be done in here, at least so far as planning. How productive are you going to be with actual typing, you know, within here? It depends on some days and you know, how loud Annie and Abby are being. But for the most part, you know, you should be able to kind of set things up where you're not worried about this and, you know, separate TWA, a mold. You know, the conclusion would be pretty much like the intro where you'll kind of reinforce, even though they use, you know, different motifs and various types of characters and all that kind of stuff, both writers are trying to get the heart of this general issue.
Good afternoon. I have a couple announcements to make. The first one is about varsity track members. Uniforms must be turned into Coach Sunday in room A103.